Do you know that in 1954, President Dwight Eisenhower made a recommendation to the United States Congress, and that was to add two words to the Pledge of Allegiance, which had gone under a one revision already, and he wanted two words added. Do you know what those two words were? Two very critical words, which have an enormous impact on the functioning of the United States of America. And they are under God. He wanted the words under God added. And that is a deep insight that he had, which is very critical to any society. And that is the willingness of the society to submit themselves to the fact that there is a morality which is not humanly created, but divinely created. And therefore we are all beholden to it. Without that, we don't really have morality. We have our own subjective ideas of what morality should be. And we are then going to be beholden to whoever at any current time is in power and decides what morality is. Let's just take a look at Nazi Germany. Yes, that's an extreme example, but actually we find communism, we find that humanity begins to gravitate towards the extremes, and only after harsh lessons does the pendulum possibly swing back, and then swings to another extreme. But when we have divine morality that we're beholden to, that is sort of like the bumpers that prevent the pendulum from going to extremes, because the morality keeps us in a stable place. This is the story of the Tower of Babel in this week's Torah portion of Noach. You may be familiar, it's a very well-known story. It occurred about 400 years after God brought a flood to the world and basically annihilated the entire world other than Noah and his family on the ark. And the reason why God did this was because of human corruption. This very problem of how human beings function when they are not beholden to God, and humanity unfortunately deviated significantly. And at that time, God said He's going to do a version 2.0 of the universe, and promised He would never bring a flood to the entire world again, which is why it never happened again. But about 400 years after the flood, those who were living as the humanity was growing, and they all decided they're all going to come together and they're going to build a single tower. They're all going to speak a single language. They're going to build a single tower that will reach to Shamayim, to heavens. V'na'aseh lanu shem, we will make for ourselves a name. What does this mean? Why were they creating this big tower? And why did they refer to it as one that reaches the heaven? And that we are going to make for ourselves a name. Well, the virtue of that generation was that they worked in tremendous unity. Unity is the greatest power that humanity has. When we work in unity, then God says, I will not destroy you, which is why we do not find a reaction to what God was very displeased with in what they were doing, which we'll discuss in a moment, but God still did not annihilate them. God only spread them out. He ruined their plans, but He didn't annihilate them. And the reason why is because they had unity, which is one of the greatest virtues and really one of the most difficult things for human beings to actually accomplish. However, what this nation, what they wanted to do was, which is why they said they wanted to build a tower to heaven, is they said, we no longer need God. Let's make for ourselves a name. Let us be, and then we now, at 400 years, and we've been figuring this out, and we got this all under cover. We got this all worked out. It's all working out just fine. It's just like a person who builds a business, and he's struggling, and things work out magically, and you thank God, and then 10 years down the road, the guy's thriving, he's making a tremendous amount of money, everything's working well, he says, God, I don't need you anymore, I'm fine, I got this on my own. That's when everything comes toppling down. And that's exactly what happened here. God was sending a message, and this is the reason why this story is included in the Torah. All of the stories included in the Torah are specific and particular. There are so many things that happened during these periods of time that we are not told about, we are completely unaware of. God only shared in the Torah those things which have fundamental lessons He wants us to learn from. And the fundamental lesson here is this: you can't have a society that is going to thrive and function without the awareness of God. When you do, you actually discover many things that are going on in our society today, which are sometimes so counterintuitive and like defy even logic. But it's just the feelings and the whims of people to consider all different types of things which are completely out of touch with reality, in denial of even science, right? But when you don't have God to hold you to a particular ground, then chaos ensues, and all chaos comes from this. And so therefore God lets us know that if you're going to build a tower, and you're going to say we're going to reach heaven and take over heaven, so to speak, right? And you're going to make for yourselves a name, you'll figure this out on your own, oh boy, you're going to create a mess. And what God did was, God actually had them, broke their unity, and it spread them out, and they were no longer working in this campaign. And this is exactly what happens to societies when there is a lack of God. And in some respect, I can say, and I'm sure you see this as well, we see this happening in our own society, in the West right now. We see this happening. There's a fabulous story I have to share with you of a great and well-known rabbi from Lithuania. His name was Harav Elchanan Wasserman. He was a great Talmudist, one of the leading minds of the 20th century, and the early 20th century, pre-World War II. And he had a yeshiva, a famous yeshiva in Branovich, a town, and it was this was probably in the 1920s or 1930s, they were in desperate need of money. There wasn't a lot of money in Europe, and he was forced to make the trip to the United States, where there were Jews who were more well off, or more Jews who were well off, and to raise money for the yeshiva. And so he took a boat, comes to America, and he gets to New York, and he tries raising money, and he's tries. But you know what? A yeshiva in Europe was not really the attractive philanthropy that wealthy Jews were looking for at that time. And it was a very hard sell, and he had a really hard time, and he hardly raised anything, barely covered his own trip there. And it was a great disappointment. And just before he was going to leave, a few days before he left, a gentleman said, there is a very wealthy Jew that lives in the Bronx area of New York. And maybe, if you can find the keys to his heart and open up his heart, and inspire him, maybe he'll give something for your yeshiva, but it's worth a shot. He's got the means, that's for sure. So he asks him, what's the man's name? And he says, the man's name is Philip Goldstein. He says, Philip Goldstein? Feivel. Feivel is my childhood friend from Branovich. I can't believe it. So he gets his number, the number of the factory. He calls up the factory and he says, can I speak to Philip? So the secretary says, just a moment. And the response back was, Philip is busy, he can't take any calls. So he tells him, tell him that it's his old friend from Baranovich who's on the phone. So he says, he tells Philip, yeah, an old friend from Baranovich is on the phone. So which friend? Philip asks. He says, Elchanan from Baranovich. He says, Elchanan? What in the world is Elchanan doing in America? Unbelievable, wow. And he grabs the phone, he says, Elchanan, Shalom Aleichem, how are you? You have to see what I have here. I have an enormous factory, multiple floors, hundreds of workers. Please come visit me. Let me show you everything I built. So Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman, takes the trip to the Bronx. He meets his old friend. They hug and they kiss. And this Philip is so excited. He's showing him through the entire factory, everything that he built. We make coats here, we make suits here. And he shows him the whole factory with great excitement. And they sit down in his office. And when they sit down, he asks him, Rabbi Elchanan, what brings you to America? He says, I have a loose button on my coat. And I need it sewn. I heard that you have a factory, so I came to get it sewn. So he says, oh, for sure, I have many, many tailors here. Let me take you to my finest tailor. And he takes him back into the factory. He shows him the loose button. The guy tightens the button. And all good. Then they kiss each other goodbye. And Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman goes back to his hotel room. A few hours later, there's a knock on the door in his hotel room. He opens up the door, and who's standing there? none other than his old friend, Philip. He says, Feivel, what are you doing here? He says, I'll tell you why I'm here. He says, I was in such excitement to show you everything that I built that I wasn't really paying attention. But when I asked you what you're doing here, you told me you came to sew a button. It's not conceivable to me that you took a trip from Europe to the United States because you had a loose button. I'm sure you could have found a tailor in Europe. So Rabbi Weinstein says, Feivel, you are correct. I did not come here because I have a loose button. And I want to tell you something else. Your soul made a far longer journey than I did from coming from heaven down to this earth. And your soul also didn't make that long journey just to sew buttons. And in that way, he opened his heart to realize that everything that God has given him and everything that he's doing is for a much more significant purpose. And it was then that he told him about his yeshiva, and he asked him for help, and his old friend Philip, helped him generously. It's when we come to the awareness and we can live day by day with the knowing that I'm not here to do things that simply excite me and make me feel like a somebody and like an accomplished person. But I was actually put here by design, by God. I live in a world where I'm aware that there is a God that created this world and a God that created me with a purpose. And then I get in touch with that based on the circumstances God has given me, living up to my purpose. That creates for an unbelievably moral and beautiful world. It's essentially when we ask, what are my duties? What is the responsibilities that God has put me on this world to fulfill? As opposed to asking, what rights do I have and what can I get out of this world? When we have a society of people who are asking, how can I contribute? Versus asking, what can I take? We have a completely different society. And here's the thing, every single one of us, you and I, change society by us as a single individual living as a person that lives up to responsibilities as opposed to living down to my rights. Make the difference you were put in this world to make.